Hi, I'm Ellen Lindner, and this is Adventure Quilt Works. Today, I want to tell you about how to make a very easy mixed media book. And we're going to start with an accordion book. You're probably already familiar with these. An accordion book is one in which the pages are arranged in a zigzag fashion as opposed to the conventional type of book where you flip the pages. These are also sometimes called concertina. Very easy to make. I like my accordion books to stand up for display purposes, just like that, which means I'm going to use a heavier paper. What I typically use is a watercolor paper, and that way I can paint it and I know it's going to take a lot of moisture, plus it's sturdy and it'll stand up for me. So this watercolor paper is 11 by 15 and it's called Cold Press 140 pound. You can find it in any art supply store, craft store, etc. The technique that I'm going to show you for making your accordion book doesn't even require any measuring. Let me show you what I mean. If we look at my little sample here, all I did was take half of a page. I could have used the whole page, except it would have given me tall, skinny pages of my book. So I did a little bit of measuring and cut my page in half, and then I'm ready to do the folding. I have painted my support paper in advance, and I recommend that if you are going to paint it, that you go ahead and do that in advance of the folding. I've painted the front and the back. To come up with a 4-page fold like this, again, you don't even need to measure. All you do is, with the right side, the pretty side, facing out, fold it in half. Now it is stiff paper, so you're going to have to fiddle with that a little bit, and then put it down and use something like a spoon to just kind of burnish and really press that edge to get a nice crease. Then you'll fold this page, this cut edge, over to your previously folded edge. Again, burnish that seam nicely. And on the other side, do exactly the same thing. So no measuring, and now you have a 4-page accordion book, pages 1, 2, 3, and 4. If you wanted to make more pages, you would just do a slight variation of what I have explained. If you wanted to do more pages, you would create a duplicate in the same general fashion, but with one change. There's a little 1/2 inch flap here on this second portion that is missing from the first. As a matter of fact, if I put them together, you can see exactly what I did. On one of them, I drew a 1/2 inch line. On one of them, the one that I showed you earlier, I cut off that 1/2 inch and did the folding as I explained. On the other one, I folded that 1/2 inch. Now, if I wanted to join those pages together, I would simply match them up like this. You could do it this way, but that's not my preference because then you've got that little bit of an overlap showing on your front side. So I would do it this way, and I would secure it with glue and probably with some machine stitching as well. It is possible to get too many pages on these accordion books, and it becomes rather cumbersome, but you could easily handle an 8-page book that I have just described, assuming you've got some pretty sturdy paper there that you're working with. So after you've got your structure going, it's time to have some fun. And you can do, that watercolor paper will take a big variety of things. So you can paint it, you can use markers and stamps and foiling and embossing and all of those wonderful things that you have in your art stash you can use on this paper. And you would go ahead and probably do that first, although that you can come back and add it later. Now, I'm a fabric collage artist, and so I like to work with fabric, and so that's mostly what I've done here on my little sample, is simply glue on fabric and paper. Fabric I'll sometimes tear and sometimes cut. Paper I will often tear because often you'll get that little ragged white edge showing, which I think is very interesting. And if you're just going to glue, you can just go to your heart's content. It's not going to show on the back, and you're off and running. If you want to use some stitching, such as I have done, then of course that does pierce through to the back, and you have to think about that. We'll talk about that more in a minute. But this is probably not going to be a two-sided display because of my decision to use stitching. I could make alternate pages and put them in here. But for display purposes, you're generally viewing it from one direction anyway. So I prefer to decorate or to design only the one side, which I'm calling the front. And the back I'm just going to keep as plain as possible. Let's talk a little bit about the stitching. I do think that it adds a lot, and sometimes if you have a little empty spot, you can see how the addition of stitching really helps. Let's talk about machine stitching first. If you were going to machine stitch heavy paper like this, first of all, you would want to use an old machine needle, and you would want to be careful of your stitch length. You know, when you do those stitches, you're actually perforating or piercing the paper, and if you were to use a little tiny stitch, you could perforate it to the point that it would not even be structurally sound. It would want to come apart. So use a longer than normal stitch length. Also, don't try to secure your threads at all at the beginning and the end. Instead, leave a tail when you start stitching, leave a tail when you finish stitching. No securing, no going back and forth, no little tiny stitches, because any of that is just going to make more holes in your paper. When you're through with your stitching, thread a needle and pull those threads to the back. Then you can do one of two things. You can use a little bit of glue to secure those tails, or you can use tape. If you're going to use tape, it should really be acid-free tape like they sell for scrapbooking or for artist framing. As far as glue, the type of glue that I use, again, it should be acid-free. So it turns out our handy glue sticks are acid-free, and so that's what I have used for all the gluing here, and then also for the gluing of the tails. Works really well. Now, if you're going to hand stitch, which I think really adds a lot to these books, there's a little bit of an obstacle, and that is when you're bringing that needle up from behind, you can't see where it's coming. You know, if you were hand stitching through fabric, you can sort of tell where it's coming as it pokes through, or if it pokes through in the wrong spot, you just withdraw it and you enter it somewhere else. Well, if you did that with paper, you've just created a hole. So what you have to do is pre-pierce at least the holes that are coming from behind. So for instance, on these little cross stitches that I did here, I pre-pierced two. I didn't need to pre-pierce all four of them because two of them are going to be, I'm going to be working them from the front. I can see exactly what I'm doing. But those two that were coming from behind, I couldn't see at all. And so I pre-pierced those two. When I came over here to do this long line, I lightly drew that line with pencil, and then I did pierce every single one in and out, did my stitching, erased the line. Well, actually, I think I erased the line before I did the stitching. And again, taped or glued that on the back, and then the same over here for the little daisy stitches. I like the stitching on it a lot. I think that adds a lot to it. So now you understand the basics of making a mixed media accordion book. But of course, there's always more to learn. In part 2, I'll show you how to make covers and closures for your book. Plus, we'll look at some additional options for making mixed media books. I hope you'll follow along. I'm Ellen Lindner. This is Adventure Quilt Works. Please be sure to join me again.